Nobody was supposed to know what happened that night. Not the officers who later wrote reports, not the leaders who spoke on public screens, not even the historians who would one day search for truth between sealed files. The night began quietly on Orion Relay Station, a massive structure floating between two distant star systems. It was a place of peace built by many species together. No weapons, no armies, only research, trade, and diplomacy. Humans were guests there, useful but not important. Ethan Cross stood alone in a narrow maintenance corridor, holding a tool case that felt heavier than usual. He was a human systems technician, assigned to work on alien machines no one else wanted to touch. Humans were considered emotionally unstable but highly adaptable. That made them perfect for dangerous jobs. Ethan did not mind. Work kept his thoughts quiet. The station lights hummed softly. Pipes vibrated with steady energy flow. Everything felt normal. Then the stars outside, the nearest viewport, went dark. Not slowly, not naturally. They vanished, as if something had erased them from existence. Ethan stopped walking. His wrist console did not show an alert. No alarms, no emergency signals. That was the first thing that made his chest tighten. Stations like Orion did not stay silent when something went wrong. A deep vibration passed through the metal floor, slow and heavy, like the station itself was afraid. Ethan placed his hand against the wall to steady himself. "What was that?" he whispered, though no one was there to answer. A second tremor followed, stronger than the first. Somewhere far away, metal screamed as if it were being twisted. Then the emergency lights turned on. Red light filled the corridor. Sirens began to cry out in sharp pulses. Ethan's console exploded with messages he could barely read fast enough. Unidentified contacts, DETCTED. Gravity distortion warning. Command channel overload. Ethan broke into a run. As he turned the corner, he nearly collided with a tall alien researcher, her skin pale with fear. She spoke in broken English, her voice shaking. "Human ships, unknown ships." Before she could finish, the station shook violently. Both of them were thrown to the floor. Overhead panels burst open, raining sparks and smoke. Ethan helped her up without thinking. "Go to emergency shelter," he said quickly. "Stay low." She hesitated, fear freezing her in place. Then a sound echoed through the station, deep, heavy, and wrong. It was not an explosion. It was the sound of something arriving. Through a shattered viewport at the end of the hall, Ethan saw them. Ships unlike anything he had ever seen. They were large, dark, and shaped like broken blades. Space bent strangely around them. Lights from the station curved when they passed near the hulls. Ethan felt cold spread through his chest. "These aren't pirates," he murmured. "These are warships." A bright flash followed. One of the station's outer defense rings vanished in a silent burst of light. No warning shot, no message, just destruction. Security channels filled with screams in different languages. Orders overlapped and contradicted each other. Species known for logic and calm began to panic. Ethan's hands trembled, but his mind sharpened. This station will not survive like this. He looked toward the central core access route. Humans were not supposed to go there without permission, but permission no longer mattered. Someone had to keep the station alive, long enough for others to escape. Ethan tightened his grip on the tool case and started running toward the core. He did not know it yet, but history had just changed. And nobody was supposed to know why. The station shook like it had a heartbeat of its own, irregular and terrified. Lights flickered, alarms screamed, and somewhere deep inside the structure, metal groaned as if begging for mercy. Ethan Cross ran through the corridor, his heart hammering, sweat stinging his eyes. Around him, alien researchers and technicians scrambled in every direction, panicked and confused. Most froze. A few ran blindly, but Ethan moved with purpose. The invaders had already boarded. They appeared in the docking bays first, not with quiet diplomacy or hesitation, but with speed and precision that stunned even the station's elite security. These were not ordinary attackers. Ethan recognized instinctively. Every movement was calculated, every step meant to destroy without mercy. The first fight he witnessed nearly made him falter. A Cathari officer, tall and muscular, charged with a plasma blade. His roar shook the hall. The invader met him in the center, a shadow moving too fast to see clearly, and within seconds the officer was thrown into the wall. The sound was like breaking metal. The Cathari did not rise. Others tried to attack, but each encounter ended the same way. Speed, strength, and unpredictability, something no species had ever faced on equal terms, dominated the hallway. Ethan ducked behind a console as another invader passed, its armor black and jagged. He held his breath and counted silently. 1, 2, 3, then ran to the next cover. Every instinct screamed to hide, but he could not. He had seen the destruction. Thousands of lives hung on seconds, and the station's core, the heart of Orion Relay, needed someone to protect it. He reached the maintenance ladder leading to the central core. Smoke swirled around him. Sparks rained from broken panels. His uniform burned where metal fell on him, but he ignored it. Humans had a strange gift. They could adapt when others panicked. Every species had rules, protocols, and strict hierarchy. Humans had instinct, gut feeling. Fear, yes, but also an ability to act anyway. Ethan climbed the ladder 2 steps at a time, using every ounce of strength. He remembered the words of an alien engineer who once praised human stubbornness. Now, that stubbornness was more than a trait, it was survival. Halfway up, an invader appeared at the top of the ladder. Its shadow stretched across the metal like darkness itself. Ethan froze for a fraction of a second, long enough for the creature to strike, but he reacted with a human, unpredictable speed. He kicked out blindly, striking its leg. The invader staggered. Ethan jumped past it, lungs burning, leaving it grasping for balance. That split second saved him. Inside the control hub, the core hummed with energy so strong it almost felt alive. The room was a maze of panels, wires, and glowing interfaces. Every species had been trained to interact with it cautiously, almost reverently. Humans, untrained and unpredictable, had an advantage. Ethan could think in ways others would never attempt, connecting patterns through instinct instead of protocol. He began rerouting power manually, overriding locks designed to prevent tampering. Heat warnings blared. Systems screamed at him to stop. Lights flickered as if the station itself was protesting his actions. Sweat ran down his face, burning his eyes. Every fiber of his body screamed that he might fail, that the station might collapse around him. Yet he continued, because fear alone could not save anyone. Outside, the invaders moved through corridors, searching, destroying, claiming dominance. Ethan watched a group corner a pair of young aliens. They were frozen in terror. He wanted to scream at them, but no sound would reach them over the chaos. Instead, he moved silently, mind racing, planning his next steps. Time slipped in strange ways. Seconds felt like minutes. Minutes felt like hours. And yet in that chaos, one truth burned brighter than alarms or destruction. Humans survived not by being the strongest, the fastest, or the smartest. They survived because they refused to stop, even when everything seemed lost. Ethan placed his hands on the final control panel and exhaled, trying to steady his racing heart. He knew the next decisions would determine not just his survival, but the survival of everyone aboard Orion Relay Station. The invaders had underestimated him, underestimated humans. That mistake would cost them. And in the midst of fear, smoke, and destruction, Ethan smiled faintly, a spark of stubborn defiance lighting his eyes. He had no weapons, no authority, only human instinct, stubbornness, and the willingness to act when others froze. Somehow that would be enough. The central core room was a cathedral of light and sound. Panels glowed in colors Ethan had never seen before, Wires pulsed like veins, and a hum filled the air, deep, steady, alive. The station's heart. If it failed, Orion Relay would die. Thousands of lives would vanish in seconds. Ethan stepped forward, ignoring sparks that fell like rain around him. He had never been trained to operate this core, never even allowed inside without clearance. But permission no longer mattered. There was no time, no rules, no hierarchy that could save them. A strange panel caught his attention. It was old, ancient even, buried beneath layers of alien design. It vibrated faintly as if calling only to him. When Ethan touched it, his mind filled with a strange sensation, like it recognized the unpredictability of humans. Instructions flashed, not in words but in emotions: fear, hope, stubbornness, sorrow. Ethan realized with a sudden cold clarity that this was no ordinary system. It was a prototype, a drive capable of folding reality itself. He had heard whispers in station logs, warnings never meant for humans, experimental, dangerous. Human emotional input required. Humans were supposed to be the last choice, the ones too volatile to handle such power. But now, the last choice was the only choice. Outside, the invaders continued their assault. Hallways that had once held peace were now rivers of fire and smoke. Aliens screamed, doors buckled under impact, and security teams fell one by one. Each failure weighed on Ethan, each lost life adding to the burning urgency in his chest. He knelt before the control panel, hands shaking, heart pounding. Activating this drive could stabilize the station, but it would also release unimaginable forces. Any mistake could kill everyone inside the core instantly. He could feel the weight of that choice pressing on him, heavier than any gravity he had ever known. For a moment he wanted to step back. He wanted to leave, to hide, to pretend he was just a technician, just a human who was lucky to survive. But the cries, the sparks, the sight of beings who had trusted him, he could not. Humans survived because they refused to stop, even when everything seemed lost. That was the gift, the curse, and the reason he had been chosen by fate. He reached out, hands steadying on the controls. Energy pulsed through him, as if the station itself acknowledged his decision. A message appeared in alien script, then translated into something he could understand. Confirmation required, human WILL only. Ethan swallowed hard. His lips trembled, but his mind was clear. I will do it," he whispered. A sudden blast shook the core. Sparks flew. Smoke filled the room. Ethan's fingers hovered over the activation panel, sweat dripping into his eyes. Fear surged, but he did not flinch. He let the fear guide him, not stop him. Humans were not calm like the other species. They acted despite fear. He remembered the young alien engineer who had shown him how to adjust a delicate sensor, the human janitor who had joked even under pressure, the Cathari officer who had trusted him in the corridor. Each life mattered. Each life gave him courage. With a deep breath, Ethan pressed the sequence. The core vibrated violently and the room was filled with blinding light. Panels screamed, wires snapped, alarms reached their crescendo. The invaders' attacks outside seemed to slow, as if sensing the unfolding force. Ethan felt a strange warmth in his chest. The system responded to him, not to logic, not to protocol, but to the full spectrum of human emotion: fear, determination, sorrow, hope, stubbornness. The impossible was beginning to happen. The station bent, reality itself bending with it. Walls shimmered, air warped, energy arced like lightning that danced to Ethan's heartbeat. He was no longer just a human technician. He was the anchor keeping the station alive, the line between life and annihilation. One thought echoed in his mind, sharp and clear: I am human, that is enough. And in that moment he understood. Sometimes, survival was not about being the strongest, the smartest, or the fastest. Sometimes it was about being unpredictable, refusing to give up, and daring to act when everyone else was frozen. Ethan tightened his grip, bracing himself. The night was far from over, and the choices he made next would decide everything. The station screamed in silence. Energy surged through every corridor, every panel, every wire, yet there were no alarms now, only the hum of impossible power. Ethan Cross stood in the core, trembling, sweat running into his eyes, as the prototype drive bent the rules of reality itself. He could feel it pulling, stretching the edges of existence, and somehow it was responding to him, to the full force of human will. Outside the viewport, space twisted. The invaders' ship slowed as if trapped in invisible chains. Ethan could see the terror in their formations, confusion spreading faster than their coordinated attack. These were beings who had conquered star systems, who had fought wars across light years. They had never faced anything like a human resisting with pure, uncalculated determination. Ethan gritted his teeth. He could feel his body screaming for rest, every nerve ending on fire, yet he did not stop. Humans had a strange strength, the ability to keep going when logic, training, and fear screamed to stop. That was what the invaders had failed to predict. A massive ship barreled toward the station. Its weapons glowed like the sun, ready to obliterate the core. Ethan's instincts told him to retreat, to hide, to survive. Instead, he reached deeper into the controls, letting the system respond to his every heartbeat, his every breath. The ship's approach slowed, its trajectory warped, as if reality itself had turned against it. Then, in a flash, it vanished, folded into nothingness alongside the others. Ethan's vision blurred. His hands shook violently. Heat and energy coursed through him, yet somehow he held the station together. Each pulse of power, each bend in space seemed to test his mind as much as his body. Pain screamed through him, but so did resolve. Humans were not perfect. Humans were not invincible. Humans, above all, were persistent. Through the viewport, he saw pieces of the invader fleet being crushed, scattered, erased. Entire wings of ships folded into non-existence. No bodies, no wreckage, nothing remained. Ethan blinked, heart racing. He could not comprehend the scale of what he had done, but instinct told him. The invaders were gone. Yet the station was not safe. Heat warnings blared. Structural panels twisted and snapped. Airlocks warped and hissed. If he released control for even a moment, everything would collapse. He could not stop. Humans survived because they refused to surrender, even when surrender seemed inevitable. He thought of the lives he had sworn to protect. Alien engineers trapped in corridors, human staff scattered across the decks, young cadets hiding in maintenance tunnels. He imagined their faces, their hope, their trust in him. That was what anchored him more than the machine ever could. Hours, or was it minutes, passed. Time felt strange in the folded space around the station. The prototype responded to human emotion, and Ethan gave it everything: fear, sorrow, stubbornness, hope. The impossible began to stabilize. The station no longer shook violently. The energy became more controlled, more focused. He had become the heartbeat of Orion Relay Station. Finally, with one last pulse of effort, the station snapped back into normal space. The fold collapsed, and for a brief, perfect moment, everything was still. Silence, except for the groans of metal and the labored breathing of survivors. The invader fleet was gone. Entire enemy formations had been erased from existence. There was no trace, no wreckage, no warning signal. Nothing remained to show the universe that the attack had even happened. Ethan slumped against the console, trembling, every part of him screaming with exhaustion. He had survived. Somehow, he had held the impossible together, not with brute strength, not with advanced technology, but with one simple thing: human persistence, human unpredictability, human courage. The aliens who had survived cautiously emerged from hiding. They looked at him with awe, fear, and confusion. They had studied humans, underestimated them, and now they understood. Humans were dangerous not because they were the strongest, but because they were unstoppable when everything else had failed. Ethan closed his eyes, trying to catch his breath. The night was far from over, but for a moment he allowed himself to feel a faint smile. He had done what no one expected. He had done what no one believed a human could do. And the universe, at least for tonight, would never look at humans the same way again. Ethan woke slowly. His muscles ached, his throat was dry, and his mind felt heavy with exhaustion. The world around him seemed unreal. Soft light filled a medical chamber, and gravity felt weaker than usual. He tried to move, but pain shot through his limbs. For a moment, he could not remember how he had survived the night. Then it all came back. The invaders, the shaking corridors, the impossible fold of reality he had held with nothing but human instinct. Ethan closed his eyes, letting the memory wash over him. His hands still trembled as if they had never learned to stop. When he opened his eyes again, several figures surrounded him. Aliens of different species, some towering, some small, all wearing expressions of awe, concern, and something he had never expected: respect. One of them, a senior counselor with blue skin and eyes like molten metal, spoke slowly. "Ethan Cross," they said, voice heavy with caution. "The incident is contained." Ethan nodded, too tired to speak. The counselor continued, "The station and everyone on it survived. There is gratitude, though words cannot describe it. Yet you must understand. What happened cannot be shared." Ethan blinked. "Why?" he asked quietly, though he already knew. The world was not ready for the truth. Humans had done the impossible, and some truths were too dangerous to reveal. "Because," the counselor said, "if it were known that a single human technician could hold the core against a superior force, it would change everything. All alliances, all strategies, everything." They offered Ethan medical care, comfort, and even medals. Humans, they said, were no longer merely adaptable. They were unpredictable, uncontainable, and dangerous in ways no machine or army could calculate. Ethan refused the awards. He declined promotions. He simply wanted to leave the chamber, to be alone for a moment, to process what had happened. He had not acted for glory, for medals, or recognition. He had acted because someone had to. Outside the chamber, the station was in chaos. Panels needed repair, life support required recalibration, and survivors moved cautiously through the twisted corridors. Yet the invaders were gone. Entire fleets, entire attacks, they had vanished as if they had never existed. No one could explain it. Only Ethan knew the truth. The other humans who had survived gathered quietly, sharing shaken glances. Some tried to speak of heroism, but Ethan shook his head. "It wasn't heroism," he said. "It was survival. That's all humans do. We survive." The aliens listened, trying to understand. They had studied humans for decades, noted our flaws, our unpredictability, and our resilience. But now they realized something new. Human persistence was a force unlike any other. It was neither logic nor strength that mattered. It was refusal to surrender, no matter how hopeless the situation seemed. Days passed. The station repaired itself slowly. Investigations began, but all reports were vague. The official story was simple. A reactor malfunction had destroyed the invaders. No one questioned it. The truth was too dangerous. Humans had saved the station. Humans had changed the balance of power. Humans had survived the impossible. Ethan walked through the corridors alone, feeling the weight of the night on his shoulders. He remembered every terrified face, every collapsing panel, every scream echoing in the metal halls. Some nights, he would close his eyes and still feel the pull of the fold in his chest, the hum of energy he had held with his own hands. He understood something vital. Humans were underestimated, and that was their greatest strength. Other species relied on planning, rules, and logic. Humans relied on something messier: courage, stubbornness, and unpredictable instinct. And tonight, that was enough to save thousands of lives. When another counselor asked him if he would take command, lead missions, or train future technicians, Ethan shook his head. "I'm just human," he said quietly. That was enough. The counselor nodded, eyes thoughtful. "It was enough," they said, "and it will always be remembered in ways the universe may never fully understand." Ethan returned to a quiet chamber overlooking the stars. Outside, the universe was unchanged, or so it seemed. But Ethan knew better. Somewhere out there, species across light years would rethink their assumptions about humans. Somewhere out there, someone would hesitate before attacking because one human had defied everything that night. And Ethan Cross, exhausted but alive, closed his eyes and allowed himself a rare moment of peace. He had done what no one else could. He had survived. He had protected life. He had been human. Ethan never thought the night's events would reach beyond Orion Relay Station. Yet, the universe has a way of noticing things it cannot explain. Even without official reports, whispers began to travel through interstellar channels. Survivors spoke cautiously. Alien witnesses exchanged uncertain glances, and some species began recalculating their assumptions about humans. The humans aboard the station were no longer merely workers, technicians, or observers. They were survivors, anchors, and now, unofficially, legends. Not because anyone would write their names in history books, but because the effect of one human's courage had altered the behavior of countless beings across space. Military strategists on distant planets debated in private chambers. If a single human can manipulate a prototype drive, stabilize the impossible, and survive against superior forces, what else are they capable of? They asked, packing their floors. It was not fear alone, it was admiration mixed with unease. Humans were unpredictable, and unpredictability could not be modeled, simulated, or contained. Ethan watched these developments quietly from his window overlooking Earth. He had returned home, though the calm green and blue of the planet felt strange after the chaos of deep space. The news media spoke of a routine station malfunction, nothing more. That was as it should be. The universe didn't need to know the full story. Yet Ethan could feel the changes happening. Alien councils sought human advisors. Starship captains requested human crew members, not for their strength or technical skill, but for their instinct, their creativity, their stubborn refusal to yield when situations seemed impossible. The very word human began carrying weight, quietly, in circles where humans had once been overlooked. Even young humans, barely trained, began receiving assignments alongside elite alien units. They were given authority, access to systems, and trust. Humans learned quickly, because they had to, but the trust itself was the seed of respect. One human technician could no longer be dismissed. One human's actions could no longer be ignored. Ethan observed quietly, a mixture of pride and unease in his chest. He did not want fame. He had not acted for accolades. And yet the universe had a way of spreading stories, even the ones no one was supposed to tell. He remembered the frightened faces in the hallways, the panels sparking, the fold of reality that had answered only to him. Those memories burned bright, a constant reminder of human potential. Across alien networks, doctrines shifted. Species that had long relied on overwhelming strength began to train differently. They studied unpredictability, improvisation, emotional resilience, traits they had long considered weaknesses. Every teacher, every strategist, every commander who had observed or heard even rumors of Orion Relay's survival began to understand one truth. Human adaptability was not just a quirk. It was a weapon of force, a new factor no one could ignore. Some species feared it, some respected it deeply, few understood it fully, and humans themselves began to see themselves differently. For centuries they had been underestimated. Now quietly they were being counted, not because of technology, not because of numbers, but because of heart. Because when everything else failed, humans acted. They survived. They endured. Ethan walked through quiet streets on Earth at night, gazing up at the stars he had once feared. Somewhere out there, the fleet of invaders was gone, scattered, erased, unknown. Yet the universe had noticed, and humans, simple, fragile, emotional humans, had made their mark. He paused in the darkness, thinking of the countless beings across space who would never forget the story of Orion Relay Station, even if they never spoke it aloud. Humans had become more than adaptable workers or technicians. They had become a standard, a measure of unpredictability that others could not calculate. Ethan smiled faintly. The universe was changing quietly, imperceptibly because of humans, not because they were the strongest or the smartest, but because they refused to give up, because they acted when no one else would, because they survived. And that, he thought, was the real legacy of that night. Years had passed since the night that no one was meant to remember. Orion Relay Station had returned to normal operations, reports of the incident reduced to vague mentions of a reactor malfunction. Yet for Ethan Cross, the memory of that night never faded. Every star he saw reminded him of the impossible energy he had held in his hands, the weight of life and death balanced on human instinct, the lives saved because he refused to stop. Most humans went on with their lives, unaware of how close the universe had come to chaos. Most aliens spoke only in whispers, sharing rumors in quiet halls, careful not to write it down, careful not to disturb the official narrative. Yet the effect of that night rippled through space, subtle but undeniable. Humans were no longer underestimated. Everywhere they were counted, watched, and occasionally feared. Ethan did not seek recognition. He had learned early that true impact did not need a name in history books. It was measured in the choices made, the lives saved, the trust earned, and the courage found in the quiet moments when fear screamed the loudest. He walked along Earth's oceans, feeling the wind on his face, thinking of the countless beings across the stars whose lives were indirectly protected by human stubbornness. One evening, a young alien cadet approached an elderly instructor on a distant station. "Why did interstellar law change after the night event?" the cadet asked, voice filled with curiosity and awe. The instructor paused, eyes reflecting countless stars, and said slowly, "Because we learned something essential. Humans do not win by being the strongest. They win by refusing to accept the ending." The cadet tilted their head. What really happened? The instructor smiled faintly, shadows crossing their face. Nobody was supposed to know, because if everyone did, the universe would never view humans the same way again, and some truths are too powerful for the universe to handle all at once. Ethan understood that truth in ways the instructor never would. Humans had a peculiar gift. They could act when no one else could, survive when survival seemed impossible, and inspire hope in even the darkest moments. That night had proven it beyond doubt. And now, quietly, that proof spread through the cosmos, invisible yet undeniable. He thought of the invader fleet, of the impossible fold of reality he had held, of the lives saved because he refused to surrender to fear. He remembered the alien engineer who had trusted him, the Cathari officer who had fallen in the corridor, the human janitor who had joked even as chaos reigned. Every life mattered, and every act of courage had been a thread in the tapestry of survival. Ethan walked through a quiet field, looking up at the night sky. Stars glittered like distant promises, and he felt the faint echo of that impossible night in his chest, a hum of energy and determination he would never forget. He had held more than a station together. He had held hope, life, and the universe's perception of humanity in his hands. Humans had been underestimated for centuries, counted as weak, emotional, unpredictable. Yet those very qualities, their fear, their courage, their stubbornness, had become their greatest weapon. And Ethan knew as he gazed at the stars that this was only the beginning. One human had made a difference. One human had changed everything. And in that quiet moment, he understood why nobody was supposed to know. Some truths were too powerful, some victories too transformative. The universe could only handle them in fragments, whispered in rumor, reflected in awe, and remembered in subtle shifts of respect and fear. Ethan Cross smiled faintly. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like a human who had done what humans always did, acted when they had to, survived when they must, and refused to surrender to impossible odds. The stars watched silently. Somewhere across the galaxy, species recalculated, alliances shifted, and humans were quietly counted among the unstoppable. And Ethan, standing alone under the night sky of Earth, understood this fully. When the universe tests humanity, even a single human can answer in ways no one expects. And sometimes, that is enough to change everything. Because nobody was supposed to know. But now, the universe did.